please start the camera, because I'm going to record this, and maybe this will be that lesson that goes up on my YouTube channel. We'll see. I've also got the visualizer from our lectern, which hopefully is going to give us a nice visual of what's going on with our synth. So, Ed, could we get the lights down, please? So this is my modular synth. I've got another rack, another layer of these that I have at home as well, but I've just handpicked some modules. And this is one of the joys of this modular thing, is you can change the way things are laid out every time. Today, my focus has been on trying to demonstrate this stuff. So the musical output might not be the most exciting thing you've ever heard, but hopefully it'll be enough to keep you interested and to demonstrate what these modules are doing. Now, you might notice that there's a big hole here. Ooh, there's about a 1.5 seconds delay on the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's that, about 120 BPM? So you might find that some of the twists and tweaks I'm making don't quite line up with what you're hearing. Apologies, there's not much I can do about that. I'm not here for my coffee, I'm here for the module. So please just be aware that you might not see things happening perfectly in real time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this AXIOM back in. I've got a power cable here, and all of the other modules are connected with the same kind of 16-pin ribbon cable. That's going to plug in the back. Ed, could you just make sure this is muted, please? Because I'm going to turn it on and it'll probably go pop. I'm just going to put a couple of these screws in just to hold it in place. I'm not going to do all 4 corners because nobody wants to watch me doing thumb screws. There we go. Lovely jubbly. And now our modular system has been put together. So you can see those modules that we were talking about a minute ago. We've got AXIOM, QUORD, my prototype that I'm working on. WONK, I've actually got 2 of those in here because we're going to be doing a few different envelope generation requirements. QUOT, ORAND, X. I'll wait for my finger to catch up with what I'm saying. And then we've also got some modules from other manufacturers. So we've got a few modules from Behringer. I'm sure you've all heard of Behringer before. They've done a mixture of creating some interesting and unique modules and mostly ripping other people off, which is what Behringer do very well. I'm not going to get into the ethics of that. Some of their stuff is brilliant. They've done some really good clones of modules that are no longer in production. They've also ripped off Roland pretty hard with some of these modules, which is a little more ethically dubious. But at the price point, I'm afraid I'm willing to be ethically dubious. I'm sorry, everybody. We've also got a module from Doepfer up here. This is really nice. This is kind of a centerpiece module for this particular rack. And Psychosis from Dreadbox as well. But as I say, there are 14,000 different modules out there. So this is just a snapshot of some of the stuff that might be available. So let's turn the rack on. Oh, it wasn't muted.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right, you can leave it on now. So we've now got power on our rack, and you can see things have come to life. AXIOM has got some stuff on the screen, QUORD's got some stuff on the screen, and we've got some nice lit LEDs. Lovely, we love LEDs. My drum machine is also going nuts on Vegas mode at the moment. Come on, give us the LEDs. But we'll come back to that in a few minutes when we add some drums into our patch. So I'm going to work my way through these modules and start making some sound. We're going to start off by looking at QUORD up here. So at the moment, QUORD is just doing the simplest thing it can do. It's outputting a C major chord. Hopefully you can just about read that on the screen. And it's outputting C4. That's the octaves. That's about the middle of a piano. And that means that these 4 notes you can see at the bottom, it's a little blurry, but that says C4, E4, G4, C5, are being output from audio outputs 1 and 4. So I'm going to take some of our patch cables. I'm going to output number 1 and plug it straight into the first channel on our mixer. And hopefully, when I push this fader up, brilliant. We've got a C4 note. If I then use a few more patch cables to connect output 2 into mixer channel 2, 3 into 3, and please bear with me because in the first few minutes of this demonstration there will be quite a lot of me plugging cables in and trying to vamp so that you don't get bored while I'm plugging them in. But we should now have, cool, the 4 notes of our C major chord, and we can also listen to them all together. Now I'm just going to turn my monitor down a touch because that's blasting my head off at the moment. Joy of wireless control. Cool, that's probably about the level we'll be working with for most of this demo, Ed, okay? So, that's a C major chord. Is that level, can you hear me in the, of course you can, Ed's doing the sound, it sounds great. So, that's a C major chord, but we can use these controls up here to change which chord is being output. So I can change the note by twisting this knob at the top right. Or I can change the octave by pushing and twisting. I can change the type of chord, the flavor. So at the moment that's a major chord, but if we change it to a minor chord, most of these notes will stay the same, but our third's going to drop by a semitone. Ooh, that's better. I much prefer a minor chord to a major chord. If we're just listening to a chord, don't worry, it's not just going to be for the whole session. But there's a whole bunch of different chord shapes in there. Sevenths, and then once we get past the kind of sixth and seventh chords, we move into some kind of utility spacings. So we've got whole tone, we've got tritone, the devil's interval, power chord, like you might have on a guitar, so that's just open fifths, octaves, this might be a bit louder. Oh, that's not too bad. We can use that to make a kind of additive organ thing. And unison, which we might use if we're trying to do something clever with different waveforms. So let's go back to our minor chord and have a quick look at inversions as well. So are we happy with what chord inversions are? Musicians, in the, kind of composers in the room? So by pushing and twisting this, I can change how those chords are spread. So if I push and twist, it's still all E's, B's, and G flat, G sharps, because we're on major. Let's go back to that minor. But we're moving them up and down the scale. If I move things in the other direction, I can do the same, but lock the bass note. So you'll find that the low note is still droning at the bottom, but we've managed to move the rest of that chord up high, and that means that I can create a chord that's got a separated bass note and kind of chordal part to it. I'm going to pull that down now because I realise I've been blasting sine waves at you for about 2 or 3 minutes now, which isn't the most pleasant thing in the world, but that's quite cool. We've managed to output some notes. But, I mean, is this the best piece of music you've ever heard? Probably not. So we need to add something more interesting, something that changes, something that's a bit more musical. So what we're going to look at next is we're going to add some rhythm to that. Rather than me just pushing the faders up and down and trying to play a song with it, we're going to use some of our other modules to create that. So I'm going to route these signals through the 4-play here, which is a QUORD VCA, or a voltage-controlled amplifier. That means that it'll do the same thing as our faders in the mixer, but we can also create that effect using an external modulation source, and that's where things get really interesting with modular synths, when we use external modulation sources. So as you can see, I'm vamping while I plug in the cables. Vamp, 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 fill the time. So you'll note, by the way, that I'm using a different color cable for each of those notes, and I'm going to try and keep that going through this demonstration. So green will always be our bass, red will always be the first note in the chord. It might not be the third, it depends on an inversion. But I'm going to try and keep that consistent throughout the demo. So if I turn these faders up now, you're not going to hear anything yet, but I've now got individual control over each of those notes. But we also have the ability to plug something into these CV inputs, these control voltage ins. And that means another module can open up our amplifier or make those sounds audible. So I'm just going to take an output from AXIOM here. I'm going to need to use a longer cable for this, actually, because it's a little bit too far across the case. And in fact, let's just use this clock for now. That's just going tick-tick-tick-tick-tick. It's just sending triggers. So this isn't necessarily going to sound musically good. It's probably not going to sound very nice, but we should hear that chord going e-e-e-e-e. Let's give it a go. Ugh. It's so short that we can't really even hear the notes. But if I slow down that clock, we're using one signal to control the level of that chord. Maybe if we use something a bit less janky than a clock, that's not what I was planning to use here, but this is quite improvised. Let's use an LFO. That's a voltage source that just goes up and down at a nice slow rate. If I plug that into our level control, that's now coming in and out, and I can speed that up. Get into amplitude modulation territory there. Okay, that's cool, but still not that musical. We haven't got that much control over the rhythms. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to run the outputs of AXIOM. We're going to make a little rhythm using this, but we're going to, instead of plugging them straight into that amplifier, we're going to put them via our envelope generator. So we'll just do that with one note to start off with. In fact, I'm going to do it with a high note so that we don't have all the notes playing at once. I'm going to go out of AXIOM into WONK, and out of WONK into our VCA. So if I turn up the number of hits in lane 4 here, we've now got a few notes spaced out throughout the bar, and if I press play, it's a little bit out of time with what you see on the screen, but you can now hear a rhythm playing. Great, we're starting to get something a little bit more musical. If I increase the density of the hits, and as with all of this stuff, I can either twist it manually, or I could plug an LFO in here to make that slowly move up and down and change the rhythm. I'm not going to go too nuts with that today because there's lots of other stuff to cover. So this is triggering WONK. I don't know if you can see this LED down here. That's, ooh, if I can get down rather than up while I'm looking at the screen. So that is the envelope. Rather than just a sudden flash, it's got a bit more release time to it. And I can change the controls on WONK to change the character of that envelope. And change the way that our sound presents itself. And crucially, we don't just need to do this for one note, but if we just throw some random numbers in, I'm just going to twist those up. Hopefully this will sound nice. If it doesn't, we can tweak in a minute. I can start adding in the other notes in our chord. That's why it sounds terrible, because I've missed the WONK out. Let's plug that into the right place. I thought that bass sounds really shite, doesn't it? There we go. Cool. So we've now got a rhythm. That's much more interesting. And one of the great things about these Euclidean rhythms is that you can pretty much throw any kind of set of parameters in there and it sounds okay-ish. I'm sure we could make a more interesting rhythm than that if we played with it, but it's a good starting point, and you know what? We're probably just going to work with that for today's session unless it gets really grating and annoying and we want to change it. So, we've got rhythm, we've got control over our envelope times. Let's just quickly talk about this parameter here. That's the kind of unique parameter on WONK that changes the timing outputs of those 4 envelopes. So if I set this playing again and I twist that up, you should find that some of the notes get longer and some get shorter. So we've got long bass and short treble. Let's move in the other direction. Cool. And once again, we could modulate that via an external signal if we wanted to, but we're not going to right now. All right, cool. Starting to sound interesting, but it's still very harmonically boring. We're just using sine waves. It kind of sounds like steel pans, actually. But Chord doesn't just output sine waves. We can also output a bunch of different waveforms. So if I hold down this function button, you'll see that we get a bunch of menu options on the screen which correspond with the numbers over here. One of those, number 7, is waveforms. So let's just jump into our waveforms menu and change all of these from being a sine wave to being sawtooth waves and press play again. We should now hear that there's a lot more harmonic content. It's probably going to sound a bit bright and buzzy. Cool. That's more synthy, isn't it? But it's not very controlled. So what I'd like to be able to do now is to filter those sounds. Low-pass filters allow us to cut away at the high-frequency content, but leave the lower-frequency content and get that wonderful, satisfying wow sound. So let's actually stop using the voltage-controlled amplifier and use a voltage-controlled filter instead. Oh, you can't see where my finger is on the screen, but I was pointing at this module, and then this module. So I'm just going to unplug all those cables from our voltage-controlled amplifier and plug them into our filter instead. I'm going to try not to shake the table too much because I don't want anyone getting vertigo and throwing up in the audience. That would not be the sign of a successful Sonic Herts show. I don't think anyone's thrown up in a Sonic Herts yet, so maybe today will be the first. I need to talk about something while I'm patching these cables. Sorry, everyone. Right, so we've now got the E minor chord. It's still coming out of chord. It's going into that filter, coming back out into our mixer, and we've got AXIOM controlling the filter frequency cutoffs. Now, this is a cool module because it allows us to either control the filter cutoff for the whole thing, all 4 notes at once, or control them individually by external control. So I can just sweep this up. I love filter sweeps when you've got subs. It's great fun. So that's cool. If we then turn on AXIOM, send that rhythm going again, we're not hearing anything yet because I need to use this control to tell the module how much of that inputted signal it's going to use to open up those envelopes. And of course the computer's logged out, so the screen's gone. Don't worry, Ed, I got it. And we can use those in conjunction with one another. So I can have the chord open as a static chord with a bit of bleepy bloopiness on top as well. We can also change the resonance. To get that kind of space-age resonant filter feel. Thanks, Ed, you're the best. Okay, we're starting to get somewhere interesting now, aren't we? But it's just the same notes over and over and over. So what I'd like to do next is move back to chord. Oh, I'll give it a second just so that we can... Cool. So, chord. We've got this one chord that's playing at the moment, but I think we're all pretty bored of listening to E2 minor with an E inversion. So let's add some extra chords in. If I go back into my functions menu, I've got a copy function at point 1 here. So if I press number 1, select that chord, and then put it into slot 1, and then change the chord that's playing. This is a G. Just make sure that's audible for a second. Copy that chord into slot 2. Let's put a B in slot 3. I'm not going to lie, I've pre-planned a chord sequence here, and it is pretty cheesy, but it works quite well to demonstrate the effect. And then an A. So I've now got 4 chords in a row. I'm going to change that top one back to an E for later on. But if I now press one of these buttons, I can move those arrows. And what those arrows are signifying is which chord will be played next. That's either when I push this red play next button, or when something else sends a signal into that to tell it to change the chord. So I can now they're all just the same chord moving up and down. So I'm just going to slightly change the inversions, change a couple of those to major chords so it's a little bit more kind of harmonically usual. So I'm going to make this one a major chord. I'm going to make this one a different inversion. Once again, I'm not going to lie, I did practice and make a little chord sequence that I thought would work quite nicely for this demo. So if we try that. Some of you might recognize that chord sequence from a relatively popular electronic music track by a French duo who wear helmets all the time. But it works quite nicely for this demo, so we're going to stick with that. So that's cool, but I've got to press the button. I don't want to press the button. Pressing the button every bar is a waste of my hand. I could be using those fingers to tweak more interesting musical things or control my drum machine or do things that are more musically relevant. So what we're going to do now is add in a control signal to change that chord every bar. Now to do that, we're going to need to stop using this link control to link our clock to our next step on the AXIOM. At the moment, every time I flick that switch, the clock runs. When I flick it again, it stops running. Instead, I'm going to do this with a patch cable, but I'm going to run it via a couple of other things first. So I'm going to start using black patch cables for clock signals. We've already got the 4 colors for our 4 notes, but let's start doing something with those as well. Now, I'm going to run this through QUORD down here. Effectively, I'm going to use this as a switch. At the moment, this is attenuating that signal, so whatever comes out the other side, this output, in fact, if I just plug it back in there for the time being to demonstrate this, nothing's happening. The clock never makes it to the next step because it's set to 0. But when I twist this up, it can be used as a play and a stop control. In an ideal world, I might buy a module that has switches instead. I don't want to buy another module when QUORD will do the job, so that's going to be our on-off switch from now on. What I'm going to do next is, instead of going directly into the next step input, we're going to plug that into the input of this 182 sequencer here. And that sequencer is then going to output back into the AXIOM. So now, when we start things running, we're still going to see AXIOM move, but we should also see some nice lights start moving down that sequencer. Cool. Now, if we just line those up, at the moment, they're not quite in line with each other, but now when I press play, we should find that every time the bar starts, we hit the top light in that sequencer. Now, the sequence is actually half the length of our AXIOM sequence, so we're going through this twice for each one of our bars, but we're making some progress. This also has a trigger output. And what the trigger output does is it outputs a signal every time we reach the end of that sequence, which means I can now have chord changing chord at the end of every bar. There's a 50-50 chance that this will be split halfway through the bar rather than in musical time, so let's find out. Everyone flip your imaginary coins. Oh, it's halfway through. So I'm just going to resynchronize that, but we've now got some automatic control over those chord changes. So let's just stop that running for a second. line everything back up. I can also manually push through the steps pressing this red button here, reset that, and we should now be in a position where when I press play, we have a nice musically controlled chord sequence playing. Of course, I've turned it down. You know what, it might actually have been in time already, but I was looking at the screen, which is about a second behind, so that threw me off. But that's now working. That's cool. We're making some progress, but we've now got a sequencer that isn't actually sequencing anything. So why don't we use the outputs of this sequencer as well to add some accents into that part? It's still quite a static bleepy bloopy. It'd be quite cool if we could make some of those notes jump out. So I'm going to take a white cable. We're going to use white cables for modulation routes. We're going to come out this control voltage number 1 over here. I'm going to plug that into the frequency modulation input over here, which has got its own little attenuator. I'm just going to turn that up. We're not going to hear anything yet, but I'm now going to increase the level on some of these steps. Hopefully, some of those notes are going to start jumping out. So I've now got separate control over that modulation source, giving us that slow rhythm, or the AXIOM modulation source, giving us the rolling modulation source. Okay? Right, I'm going to throw a few more bits in to make this more sonically interesting, but I am very much over my time already. How can I? No, you've got 10 minutes, but then we'll have cool. To if that's okay. Yeah, that's completely fine. If anyone wants to ask any questions or play with any of this afterwards, that's cool, but please don't miss the other events just because I'm here. So what we're going to do is I'm very quickly going to run the notes through this Psychosis, which is going to give us a bit of a more interesting stereo spread. I was going to talk about that for a few minutes, but I'm going to skip that bit because I want to get the drums blasting in this, to be quite honest. And I'm also going to change our bass part. Instead of having it linked into that chord and kind of connected sonically to the chord part, I'm going to use some other cables. I meant to keep my greens out here. We'll just use reds. That's going to confuse things. Sorry, red is now bass and first note. Ooh, I'm a monster. But I'm going to run that through a different filter. And that's going to allow us to have separate control over the signal for that bass part and separate our mix a little bit. So let's just have a listen to what the Psychosis is doing with the first 3 notes first. So what this is doing is I'm taking the top 3 notes of our chord, running them through this module here. If I turn that up. Ooh, why can't we hear anything? And what this is doing is it's panning some of those hard left and right. So if I move the panning out, can you hear that spread? I can't hear it from here because I've only got a mono monitor, but I can pull those from stereo to mono to inverted stereo, and it's got a built-in LFO. So that's giving us a little bit of stereo movement. It's also got a little built-in reverb, so let's throw some of that on there. And let's get that bass part working as well. So I'm going to run the bass through a separate envelope generator. So I'm coming out of WONK into this input here. And that's going to control both the frequency cutoff of our bass part. And I'm also going to use it to control the level, because that filter has a built-in VCA. And we can use the WONK to change the relationship between the filter envelope and the amplitude envelope. We're now in a position where we can start thinking about adding some drums into our mix. So I'm just going to set this to listen to the right clock input. I'm going to add a couple of extra cables. So one is coming out of my drum machine and going into this last mixer track. Ooh, yikes, that doesn't sound good, does it? What's going on there? I didn't plug the cable all the way in. Let's try again. Cool, I just need to sync that up so that it can actually start looping, but that sounds like it's working. So I'm going to just stop that for a second. I'm going to steal this signal and I'm going to run it through a mult so that I can take a copy of that clock that's running AXIOM and use it to both control AXIOM and also control our drum machine, so that everything can be in time and nicely synchronized. As you may have noticed, I'm now speeding up my demonstration process a little bit, because I want to get to the point that we can hear this is something slightly more musical rather than talking about every step of the way. I got carried away. I always get carried away. I'm so sorry. So we're now in a position where, I'm just going to get this to the end of a bar. If I set this to jump back to our E, I set our drum machine to sync, I press play on it, and I'm going to turn on the metronome so that hopefully when I press play here, we're going to hear tick, 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 tick. If that's in time, I'm going to try and quickly build a drum pattern into this, and then just do a kind of 2-minute performance with what we've set up there today. Okay, let's give it a try and see if it works. If it doesn't, then please be aware that I started with no patch cables, and this is relatively improvised. Let's give it a go. The drums are in time, that's good. So that's just going to do its thing for the next hour or two. Thank you very much. So I've got about 30 seconds left, so thank you so much for coming and indulging me today and talking about my kind of hobby side business and making a bunch of bleeps and bloops for you. I'm really enthusiastic about helping you guys in creating your own ideas and turning them into something real. So please come and talk to me. You know where I live, up in the tech office. Thanks for coming along today. Thank you so much, Kyriakos, for taking the hideous risk of putting me on this stage. And a big thanks, a round of applause for Ed doing the sound like a legend as always. Yeah, go Ed. I don't know if you want to say anything, Kyriakos, but that's me. Thank you.